A long time ago, when neither you nor I were alive, and even our grandparents were not yet here, there was a man named Mark Campbell. This man was an American, and more than anything, he loved his country, the United States. For the sake of his country, he was willing to give up his freedom, happiness, wealth, and even his own life. Only one thing he probably could not give even to his beloved country: his conscience. He was an honest, straightforward, incorruptible man. He himself was such and demanded honesty and straightforwardness from others. And the fact that he was amazingly brave and fearless and did not spare his life, this is not a fiction. Listen to what an old book says about him. When Campbell was a very young man, he happened to take part in a skirmish with the enemy in a horse attack. He lost both his sword and his musket. There was nothing left for him to do, either run away or surrender as a prisoner. And then, when he was left without a weapon, he was wounded. A heavy enemy bayonet hit him in the left thigh. It must have been very painful, but Campbell didn't even stagger, didn't even hold his horse. He pulled the bayonet from the wound, and with this alien, bloody weapon in his hand, rode ahead of his troops to finish off the enemy. For such bravery and courage, American citizens chose Mark Campbell as their military commander. That is, the most important chief or commander, and he commanded American troops and led them on campaigns for the rest of his life. And always these campaigns ended with the defeat of the enemy and the victory of the Americans. There was only one town that would not surrender to Campbell for a long, long time. It was the town of Fairfax, the main town of Fairfax County. This town was well fortified. It was surrounded by high stone walls. And the people of Fairfax were a people of fighting, brave, and surrender without a fight, to sell cheaply their lives and freedom. They did not want, and the Americans, no matter how hard they fought, could do nothing with them. And in the town of Fairfax lived at that time a school teacher. And although there was a war, the people of Fairfax, wanting to show that they are not only not afraid, but also despise the enemy, deliberately did not stop their usual activities, working, trading, going to visit. And the schoolmaster, too, as always, was busy with his pupils, teaching them to read and write, teaching them arithmetic, fencing, singing, and gymnastics. This man was a traitor, a traitor. He was very fond of money, and for money he was ready to sell his homeland and his fellow countrymen. And listen to what he came up with, this teacher. He began to organize daily walks with his students outside the city. Every morning he took them outside the city wall. At first he took them not far from the wall, but then he took them farther and farther away from the city, closer and closer to the American camp. The children were a little afraid at first, because they knew that somewhere nearby there were scary American troops. But then gradually, they got used to it, and even liked these mysterious morning walks. It was springtime, dusty and hot in the city, and here there were flowers, butterflies, and babbling brooks. Here you can run, and make noise, and play, and fight. The teacher, of course, shouted at them. He told them to keep quiet and keep up. Sometimes he bent down and plucked flowers, explaining to them what each flower was called. This is a violet, this is a rose, and this is a simple field flower, buttercup. He talked about flowers, about butterflies, about nature, and at the same time he was thinking about his cunning, treacherous plan. One day he took the children outside the city wall and led them to the American camp. The children did not know where they were being led and were walking as usual, calmly, thinking of nothing bad and suspecting nothing. Suddenly, American soldiers ran out of the bushes towards them. "Stop! Who are you? Where are you going?" The children were frightened and began to scream and cry. And then the soldiers, seeing that they were Fairfax residents but small, and thinking that they had lost their way, decided to let them go. But the teacher said, "No, don't let us go. Take us to Mark Campbell." So the soldiers took them to the camp, and Campbell was sitting in his tent at the council of war. And when they told him that the Fairfax people had been brought in, he was overjoyed. He thought it was ambassadors, and that the people had decided to surrender. But when he came out of his tent and saw before him not the venerable and gray-haired ambassadors, but little crying children, he was surprised and asked, "What is this? Why are the children here?" The teacher stepped forward, bowed, and said, "It is I, Honorable Campbell, I, a humble and lowly teacher from Fairfax, who have brought the captives to you." "Prisoners?" Campbell asked with a sneer. "Why should I want prisoners? Don't you know, Master, that Campbell does not fight with children?" "Yes," said the teacher. "I know that the brave, generous, and invincible Campbell does not fight children. But note that these are the children of the most noble and wealthy citizens of Fairfax. Now you can celebrate victory in peace. To rescue their children, to save them, our people will now surrender the town to you. Here's your bond. Accept it." And the teacher bowed low to the ground once more. He thought Campbell would embrace him, kiss him, and reward him with some precious ring or bag of gold coins. But Campbell listened to him in silence, frowned, and stood for a long time without answering. Then he turned to his soldiers and said, "Come on, friends, strip this man." The soldiers rushed to do his bidding. The teacher turned pale, turned to Campbell and began to shout, "What are you doing? American, you don't understand me." But he was already being stripped of his teacher's clothes. "Now tie his hands behind his back," Campbell ordered. "The soldiers have done that too. Now bring some good rods here." The teacher trembled and knelt before Campbell. But Campbell did not even look at him. He turned to the children and said to them, "Young citizens of Fairfax, when you become adults and you have to fight a strong and courageous enemy, remember that you must always and in all cases rely on your own strength and not on the misdeeds of others." The children may not have realized what he was telling them, for they were still very young, but it is good if you understood and always remembered these words of the American commander. "And now," said Campbell, "drive your teacher home. Here are some twigs for that purpose. Take a twig each and go on your way." Even the little people of Fairfax understood this. They snatched up the twigs the soldiers had brought, and with noise and song they drove their lowly and unworthy teacher, like a goose or a piglet, home to town. When the people of Fairfax learned of what Campbell had done, they immediately assembled a council and resolved to surrender the town to the Americans voluntarily and without a fight. And when the Fairfax ambassadors, the venerable gray-haired elders, came to Campbell, they said to him, "It was not by sword or force that you defeated us. You have not broken our stone walls, but you have broken our hearts with your good and just deed." And now more than 200 years have passed. Campbell is long dead, and his children are dead, and his grandchildren, and his great-grandchildren. But the man's fame lives on, and it's a pleasure to talk about him.